So I wanted to kind of go over the step-by-step tutorial on how to operate a DSLR from not knowing anything about it to becoming a bit more fluid when it comes to operating cameras. And as you can see, the shot is pretty terrible, so let's fix that. And as you can see, just by adding one light to your video is going to make a drastic difference. But this video isn't about lighting just yet. I wanted to talk about the camera and how to operate it and to turn it on. Seriously, I want to show you guys how to turn it on and put a lens on and things like that, because to a lot of people who are entering a DSLR realm might not have any idea on how to do these things. But most DSLRs, at least on the EOS Rebel side, have a manual switch right here. A lot of the EOS line has two main modes that you can switch from. That is the photo mode and the video mode. The video mode will have a big camera right next to it, and the photo mode will just have the word on labeled onto it. Now, to attach the lens, I don't have an extra lens on me right now, but it's basically you just line up your EF lens, which if you have a Canon EOS or a Canon Rebel series camera, you need an EF lens, and generally these are labeled as EF Canon mounts or maybe Canon EF mounts. Now you'll notice that there is a red dot and a white dot. The red dot is for full frame lenses and the white dot is for crop sensor cameras like this one. So if you want to install a lens, all you have to do is just line up the dots, red on red or white on white, and just turn it clockwise until you hear a click, and then that's it. That's how you know it's inserted. If you want to take out the lens, all you have to do is just press this little button on the side of the sensor and then twist it the opposite way, and then it'll pop right off. This isn't a review about any specific camera, by the way. This is a step-by-step guide on how to operate your first camera. So most cameras have the SD card slot on the side here, and if you don't have it on the side, it's probably where your battery compartment is in here. So really quick, one thing I did forget to mention is that there's a difference between the TI cameras and just the regular versions of that. So for instance, if you have a Canon T5i, it's going to be significantly different than the Canon T5 and have more features than the Canon T5. Like I know the Canon T5i has a flip out screen and a microphone jack, whereas the Canon T5 I don't think has those options. On top, you'll notice that most cameras have a cold shoe or a hot shoe mount, and this allows you to attach microphones, monitors, lights. If you want to take a picture, it's really easy to do. You want to have your camera and the photo mode, like I said before, you just press the little button on the front of the camera here and you are good to go. Now if you want to record videos, it's easy. All you have to do is just switch it to the movie mode, and most cameras have it labeled as a big red dot somewhere on the camera, the top, the back, and you just press that and then it starts recording. So assuming that you have your camera turned on, SD card and battery are properly in place, it's super easy to learn the basics of how to operate a DSLR. There are four main things you really need to know that aren't on the camera bodies itself, but inside the camera itself. You want to learn how to set your exposure really, and we're going to do this by kind of going over the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. There's one more thing that you really need to know if you're recording videos, and that is your frame rate. Now I usually shoot at 30 FPS because my camera doesn't support 24 FPS, but for those of you who don't know what FPS means on a camera, it basically means that if you're shooting at a lower frame rate, the choppier your videos will look. A lot of people like the lower frame rate, like the 24 FPS, because of the fact that it basically feels like it's a movie. I shoot at 30 FPS because I feel it's more natural. There are cameras that can shoot 60, 120, or even 240 FPS, but these usually come with consequences, like if you're shooting on a Canon T5i, you're going to be drastically dropped from a 1080p resolution to just a 720p video recording. Now let's talk about the shutter speed, which is the most important thing in making your videos feel natural. Shutter speed is the motion blur essentially that kind of created by the light that enters your camera for X amount of time. So let's say if you have your shutter speed set to 1/50th of a second, it'll allow all light that is coming through the camera to enter the sensor for 1/50th of a second, and it just keeps repeating that process. And the rule of thumb is to have it set double of your frame rate. So let's say if you're shooting at 30 FPS, you want to have your shutter speed set to 60, and same thing goes for all the other frame rates on your camera. And if you go down to a faster shutter speed, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to make things more choppy, more still, which is great for capturing high speed moments like sports or nature photos and things like that. And the one more thing that I think really ties everything together as far as camera settings go is the aperture. Now, a lot of you who have watched my channel before might have noticed that there isn't any lights in the background whatsoever, and this is to prove my point and how important it is. And as you can see, the background and the blurriness, also known as bokeh, is really shallow, really blurry, and it looks really nice for a lot of people. Now, this is going to be depending on the lens that you have, and we'll get to that here in a second. But I wanted to kind of point out how important it is to have a correct aperture. Now, some of these settings like your shutter speed and your aperture influence in how bright your video can be. Now, a quick look at what the aperture is. It's actually nothing to do with the camera itself, but the lens that you have chosen to go with the camera. Mine is a 35mm lens with an f1.4. The faster or the lower the number, the blurrier the background. We prefer having a fast aperture or wider aperture like a f1.4 as fast or wide. It's because the aperture inside of the diaphragm inside of the lens is a lot bigger than something like an f3.5, allowing more light to enter the sensor. So a quick rundown on my settings and my lens. I use the Canon SL3 with the Sigma Art 35mm f1.4, which is around $1,000 setup. I use a 30 FPS frame rate. I use a 1/60 shutter speed with a f1.4 aperture, and I think it says a 200 ISO. It just digitally brightens the image, but there's also consequences for that. Like if you have a lower end camera, it generally brings out a lot of unnecessary noise. I think that's gonna be the end of the video. I hope this is the last take because this is like my 20th take in this video. If you guys like the video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, before try check yourself. Peace.